Hey there, welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight, Tim Walz accepts the Democratic nomination for Vice President.
Meanwhile, pro-lifers counter free abortions at the DNC.
And the U.S. jobs report sees its biggest downward revision in more than a decade. All right, but first we begin with the latest updates from the DNC in Chicago, where Minnesota Governor Tim Walz formally accepted the Democratic nomination for Vice President last night. Here's some of his acceptance speech.
Thank you, first of all, to Vice President Harris. Thanks for putting your trust in me and for inviting me to be part of this incredible campaign. It's the honor of my life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States.
Walz then went on to highlight his achievements as governor, including expanding abortion access in his state, also while touting the Democratic Party as the party of freedom.
When Republicans use the word freedom, they mean that the government should be free to invade your doctor's office. Corporations free to pollute your air and water. And banks free to take advantage of customers. But when we Democrats talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make a better life for yourself and the people that you love. Freedom to make your own health care decisions. And yeah, your kids' freedom to go to school without worrying about being shot dead in the hall.
Unlike previous speakers at the DNC, Walz made very few direct mentions of Donald Trump, that is apart from trying to tie his policies to the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, something that Trump has repeatedly rejected.
Some folks just don't understand what it takes to be a good neighbor. Take Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Their Project 2025 will make things much, much harder for people who are just trying to live their lives. They spent a lot of time pretending they know nothing about this. But look, I coached high school football long enough to know, and trust me on this, when somebody takes the time to draw up a playbook, they're going to use it.
Kamala Harris will give her speech tonight to officially cap off the convention. All right, and for more on Walz's appearance at the DNC, we now go to FISM's Ian Patrick.
Democrat vice presidential hopeful Tim Walz is being criticized for reportedly false comments he's made about IVF, making it the latest in what has become a long string of similar critiques. During his speech at the DNC, Walz took to the issue of abortion and defended the procedure. He then honed in on in vitro fertilization, or IVF, which has also been the subject of some pro-life state legislations. In defending IVF, Walz reiterated a point he's made multiple times, that his family wouldn't be here without IVF.
And that includes IVF and fertility treatments. And this is personal for Gwen and I. If you've never experienced the hell that is infertility, I guarantee you, you know somebody who has. And I can remember praying each night for a phone call, the pit in your stomach when the phone had rang, and the absolute agony when we heard the treatments hadn't worked. It took Gwen and I years, but we had access to fertility treatments. And when our daughter was born, we named her Hope.
Now, oddly enough, that statement isn't totally correct, although Walz has said this on several occasions.
Today's IVF day. Thank God for IVF. My wife and I have two beautiful children.
Yeah, first of all, it was up to him. I wouldn't have a family because of IVF and the things that we need to do reproductive. My kids were born through that that way.
His wife has recently come out to explain that their procedure was, in fact, different. Gwen Walz clarified that she and her husband used another process called intrauterine insemination, or IUI for short. The process differs mainly through the actual insemination process, where IUI still occurs within the female patient, and IVF requires egg removal and insemination outside of the patient's body. But still, the bigger story here is that Walz's comments on his family undergoing IVF were highlighted very quickly by Republican vice presidential hopeful J.D. Vance. On Tuesday, Vance responded to one of Walz's comments, asking, quote, who lies about something like that? In fact, Vance has been a particular thorn in the side of Walz, as the two have challenged each other on multiple fronts. Vance previously got after Walz for claims about his military record, which he said were used for political gain.
This is a guy who was captured on video saying, I carried a gun in war. He never went to war. This is a guy who's been captured on video. As other people say, he's an Afghanistan veteran. He's a veteran of a war, nodding along in agreement instead of saying, no, 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 I did serve my country and I did it honorably, but I never went to a war zone. I'm not criticizing Tim Walz's service. I'm criticizing the fact that he lied about his service for political gain, Dana.
Walz and Democrats defended his own service and even accused J.D. Vance of disrespecting the armed services for such comments. But other sources actually seem to corroborate at least some, if not all, of Vance's claims. For example, Walz had once claimed he retired from the Army National Guard as a command sergeant major, but the Army clarified that he actually retired as a rank below that one. His claim of carrying a gun in war was also disputed and labeled embellishment by some who knew him during his time in the force.
I'll take my kick in the butt for the NRA. I spent 25 years in the Army and I hunt. And I gave the money back, and I'll tell you what I have been doing. I've been voting for common sense legislation that protects the Second Amendment, but we can do background checks. We can do CDC research. We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
And his retirement from the National Guard did happen shortly before his unit was warned that they may actually be heading over to Iraq. At least one former member of his National Guard unit labeled such claims as an attempt at stolen valor. 50 other politicians wrote a letter to Walz asking him to stop his embellishment on his military service. Now, Walz has fought against all of these accusations, from the IVF to the stolen valor, but the latest example with the IVF does muddy the situation for the VP hopeful. As the New York Post writes in one of its reports, quote, it demonstrates how the questions being asked are forcing the campaign to do some editorial damage control. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
Thanks for that report, Ian. And now for still some updates here from the DNC. Pro-lifers at the event are offering a different solution to the infamous abortion bust, where 25 pregnancies were allegedly scheduled to be terminated. Live action reports at the pro-life diaper company Every Life and the nonprofit Thrive Nation showed up to provide aid for women considering abortion. Another group called Sidewalk Advocates also debunked the pro-abortion messaging, which claimed that the Planned Parenthood initiative has been highly successful. The organization said that many attendees didn't care about free on-site abortion, nor did they want the organization there. The pro-life group said that only a few women chose abortion, while most of the people on site were media. Meanwhile, Democrats for Life raised almost $5,000 to provide free diapers for locals in Chicago, including immigrants.
Well, that's very encouraging to see people pushing back, especially among Democrats. Sometimes we forget that there are pro-life people even on the left.
Yeah,
so
the outliers. Yeah,
yes. Meanwhile, the Republican National Committee has now taken it upon itself to lay out a list of Kamala Harris's policies, considering she still doesn't have a policy platform of her own on her own website. This week, the RNC launched a website called Kamala2024policies.com, listing Harris's left-wing record on various issues, such as when she proposed ending private health care while running in 2020 in the Democratic primary. She also, at the same time, said she supported banning fracking during the primary and perhaps even letting convicted terrorists vote from prison. Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, says it's because of these policies and her record as vice president that Harris's campaign has focused so much on attacking Donald Trump.
Well, I think it's an interesting contrast, Jake, between what President Trump and I are offering, which is very simple. We are advancing policies that are going to lower the cost of housing, lower the cost of food, secure the southern border, and raise wages for the middle class. And Kamala Harris really can't run on accomplishing that because her policies have, in fact, caused a lot of the problems and a lot of the suffering that we see in our country. There's a lot of attacks on Donald Trump, a lot of criticisms of what he's done and what he's said, not a whole lot of positive vision for how Kamala Harris is going to fix the problems that plague the country.
Last week, Harris laid out her economic agenda, including plans to target price gouging at grocery stores and to give $25,000 to first-time homebuyers, among other initiatives. However, the details of those policies are still not listed on her website.
And while the Vice President and Donald Trump are stealing the spotlight, RFK Jr. allegedly plans to withdraw from his campaign. According to the Daily Wire and NBC, the independent candidate will likely endorse Trump. RFK announced on X yesterday that he will give a speech in Phoenix tomorrow, addressing his path forward. Kennedy's running mate, Nicole Shanahan, hinted at the future when she said there are only two options: risk a Harris-Walz administration or join forces with the former president. However, Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance, clarified that the potential endorsement from RFK isn't tied to a cabinet position.
Well, look, I think clearly Donald Trump is not going to say, I'll give you a cabinet position if you give me an endorsement. But he's been working for RFK's endorsement because RFK represents, I think, an old guard of the Democratic Party that was patriotic, that was actually very supportive of American workers, and that unfortunately isn't very welcome in today's Kamala Harris-led Democratic Party.
Trump commented that he's known RFK for a long time and he respects him a lot, so he would love the endorsement. And up next, Egypt casts doubts on Gaza's ceasefire deal. That and more after this break.
Navigating through investment options can be challenging, especially when you're determined to uphold your God-given values. Every dollar you invest is a vote for the world that you want to live in. Let your values guide your investment decisions and help to shape the culture in which we live. Become a beacon of light and pave the way with biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, where faith and finance collide. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
My name is Valtasia. I have 5 kids total. I was basically a single mom. I didn't have an address to my name, and here it comes, that not just one baby I'm finna have, it was 3. I honestly was not gonna keep them. I had it in my mind deep down inside that I couldn't do it. I came straight abortion minded. What changed my mind was I talked to the counselor and, very encouraging. They'll also tell me, you're not going to be alone. If you need anything, reach out to us or anything. I was amazed. I definitely have a challenge of having my babies. A lot of people will ask me, how do you do that? How do you maintain? Only thing I could say is prayer. Prayer really, really worked.
To donate, just dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby, or go to financialissues.org and click on the preborn banner.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's start in Canada, where anti-Semitic threats set the country on high alert yesterday. According to CTV News, more than 100 synagogues and Jewish organizations across the nation received the same terror threat email. A law enforcement spokesperson responded to the concern in a statement that officials are ensuring that Jewish leaders have the information and resources they need during this time. The Federal Policing National Security Program is investigating the incident as of now. Anti-Semitism has been on the rise in Canada since the October 7 attacks. A national report revealed that anti-Semitic attacks had doubled in 2023, including 77 that were violent.
Very troubling indeed. Meanwhile, the White House continued to press for its Gaza ceasefire proposal this week after Secretary of State Antony Blinken returned to Washington without having secured a final agreement. President Joe Biden announced yesterday that he spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about the proposed deal, with the White House saying Biden, quote, stressed the urgency of bringing the deal to a close and discussed using negotiations in Egypt this week to work out the remaining obstacles to a deal. Now, despite the pressure from the White House and reports of even optimism from Washington itself, both Israeli and Hamas officials have expressed criticism of the proposed deal, as just this week, mediators from Egypt also appeared skeptical about the proposal, with one high-level official calling it, quote, not acceptable for us and, of course, for Hamas. As it stands right now, the deal reportedly calls for a 6-week end to fighting in exchange for the release of the remaining hostages held by Hamas.
And an apparent Houthi attack has set another oil tanker ablaze in the Red Sea. 4 projectiles reportedly struck the Greek-owned Sunyan at the same time that the men in small boats opened fire on the tanker. The crew warned the British military that the vessel was not under command, meaning it most likely lost power. A coalition vessel rescued the crew of 25. The British military says that a second ship was targeted in the Gulf of Aden yesterday and today, with a total of 5 explosions striking near it. Since the war in Gaza began, the Yemeni rebels have attacked over 80 ships, seizing 1 and sinking 2 others.
At the same time, Lebanon's Hezbollah launched more than 50 rockets toward Israel yesterday, striking private homes in the Golan Heights and injuring at least 1 person in the process. The Iranian proxy group claims it was responding to an Israeli airstrike that took out a weapons storage facility recently, killing 1 person and injuring 19 others as well. The facility was 50 miles into Lebanese soil, which is a significant increase from Israel's usual targets. This came only hours after the terror group launched more than 200 projectiles towards Israel on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Iran is still threatening to retaliate for the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, as well as this week, Iranian diplomats to the UN suggested they would conduct a ground attack. However, the Institute of War finds that scenario highly unlikely, though it does stand by an assessment that Tehran and its proxies will coordinate a large-scale attack on Israel very soon.
Very concerning, and still here in the Middle East. Yesterday, the United Arab Emirates accepted a Taliban ambassador from Afghanistan, making them only the 2nd country to do so. The Foreign Affairs Ministry in Afghanistan confirmed earlier this week that the UAE had accepted its new ambassador, Badruddin Haqqani. In December of last year, China became the first country to accept an ambassador from the Taliban government. The UAE's decision comes as it increases its economic ties with Afghanistan. In 2022, the country won rights to operate at Kabul's international airport. And although neither China nor the UAE have made any official statements recognizing the Taliban government, the move is supposedly a part of an effort to increase diplomatic relations. Other nations, including the U.S., have said that they will refuse to recognize the Taliban until they improve women's rights in the country.
And finally, taking a quick update to the war in Europe now, where Russian President Vladimir Putin accused Ukraine earlier today of launching an overnight attack against a nuclear power plant in Russia's Kursk region. The Russian president says he's now informed the UN nuclear watchdog agency of the alleged attack, but he offered no other details or evidence. The UN is now sending in a specialist team to check out the situation. Ukrainian forces have been battling roughly 18 miles from the plant since earlier this month, as the cross-border raid caught the Kremlin apparently by surprise, prompting hundreds of thousands of evacuations. However, Russian propaganda appears to be downplaying the invasion as nothing more than a mild wartime disruption. They say Russia will retake the territory after a, quote, inevitable Ukrainian defeat across the border. And with that, we have plenty more news coming up next. We'll be right back after a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. Tonight, let's explore one of the most sinister events in the history of the ancient world. Now, this event was made even more sinister by the man who used it for his own political gain. In the year 64 AD, the city of Rome stood above civilization as the most powerful metropolis on Earth, the capital of the mightiest empire in the world. But on July 18, 64 AD, a fire broke out that could have very well destroyed the city. Instead, the empire in charge used it to remake the city and crack down on the growing Christian population in it. Let's explore the Great Fire of Rome and the man who benefited from it, the Emperor Nero. On July 18th, the blaze in Rome broke out in a poor section of the city near Palatine Hill. Homes in ancient Rome were mostly made of raw materials such as wood and straw that burned easily. This, combined with the high winds and the summer heat of July, caused the fire to spread quickly. The city of Rome was split into 14 districts at this time, and historians tell us that the fire damaged 11 of those 14 districts and completely destroyed 3 of those damaged. Obviously, many people were killed in the flames, and many more were injured. Now, historians have long since asked the question, what was the Emperor Nero's role in the fire? No one knows who started the fire, but legends have arisen claiming that it was Nero who started the fire, while others claim he sat idly by, intentionally ignoring the chaos while the city burned. We have no proof of this, but we do have very telling proof of Nero's wickedness from his response to the fire. Nero was a man who many historians believe was at least mentally unstable, if not insane, and he capitalized on the fire in 2 ways. One was aesthetic, and the other was religious. Aesthetically, he simply did not like the way the city looked before the fire and used it to rebuild the city exactly the way he wanted it. And religiously, he found a scapegoat for the flames in Christianity, which was at this time seen as a major threat to the Roman state. Nero blamed the Christians in Rome for starting the fire, resulting in the martyrdom of hundreds of believers during his reign. And in a historical irony, his most famous torture method was with fire, lighting Christians on fire and using them as human torches for his parties. Well, we know from history that the church long outlasted this wicked man. Christianity is the most popular religion in the world today, and the church has flourished in times of persecution, while the Emperor Nero has been dead since the year 68 AD. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Through the ministry of Preborn, the Financial Issues family has saved tens of thousands of lives of babies. What an amazing job that God has done through you, the Financial Issues family. Would you join us in saving the lives of babies? What an amazing reunion we will have in glory, meeting all the people that we have saved. Please go to preborn.org, that is preborn.org, or financialissues.org, and click on the Preborn banner.
If investing with biblical values is important to you, you're not alone. Millions of people invest their money according to their personal beliefs. That's why we offer a subscription service that gives you access to biblically responsible stocks, buys and sells, and a portfolio tracker tool that tracks your asset allocations. Being a Financial Issues partner is the best way to ensure your investments reflect your values. At Financial Issues, we believe in providing our partners with the best possible information and resources so they can make informed decisions about their money. With our help, you can feel confident that your investments are in line with your personal beliefs. Gain access to our biblically based stock buys and sells for only $132 per year. Invest biblically, responsibly. Go to financialissues.org and become a partner today. That's financialissues.org.
Hey there, and welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We're going to kick off this segment here with a look at the economy, where new minutes released by the Federal Reserve now show that the central bank is looking towards cutting interest rates sometime next month. The minutes from a July meeting showed that the, quote, vast majority of officials believe the bank should cut interest rates in September, agreeing that, quote, if the data continued to come in about as expected, it would likely be appropriate to ease policy at the next meeting. Should it happen, it will be the first rate cut since 2020, and this comes as last month the Federal Reserve unanimously voted to hold interest rates steady between 5.25 and 5.5%, which happens to be the highest level we've seen in 2 decades.
And still in the economy here, the U.S. has added less than 800,000 jobs this past year than anticipated. This means about 2 million jobs were created in 2023 instead of the projected 3 million. However, the revised amount isn't referring to job losses. It's simply the actual number of jobs that were added during this period. However, this new data might also mean that a more significant economic downturn is coming. The unemployment rate is at 4.3%, and it's a post-pandemic high. July. According to NBC, those looking for jobs hit the highest level in a decade last month. This included both employed and unemployed individuals. White House Chief Economic Advisor Jared Bernstein said in a statement that despite these concerns, the data in question doesn't change the fact that the jobs recovery has been and remains historically strong.
I understand he's trying to put a positive spin on things, but that's pretty tough to do when you have such a historic revision.
Right, yeah, so we can only hope it will work out.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in other news, a federal judge down in Texas has now barred a new Federal Trade Commission rule from taking effect that would have banned non-compete agreements in businesses. Judge Ada Brown temporarily blocked that rule back in July following a challenge from the Chamber of Commerce. She now ruled on Tuesday that the FTC had overstepped its authority by implementing such a broad rule, saying the, quote, commission's lack of evidence as to why they chose to impose such a sweeping prohibition instead of a more targeted, specific policy to harmful non-competes, renders the rule arbitrary and capricious. An FTC spokesperson said the agency was disappointed with the ruling and is seriously considering a potential appeal.
Elsewhere, 15 states are suing the Biden-Harris administration to block non-citizens from receiving free taxpayer-funded health care. The lawsuit centers on a rule revision in the Affordable Care Act that expands the definition of lawfully present to include 200,000 DACA recipients. The states argue that the new policy violates the Administrative Procedure Act, saying Congress has twice limited eligibility coverage to exclude the group. The states add that DACA recipients are unlawfully present in the U.S. by definition. Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach, who is leading the lawsuit, says that the Biden administration shouldn't get a free pass to violate federal law. The states are asking courts to vacate the rule before it goes into effect on November 1st.
Certainly a controversial policy and one I could see Republicans taking advantage of going into the election. Speaking of the election and issues on the table, abortion continues to be very controversial this election cycle, as Arizona Supreme Court has now dismissed a pro-life challenge to an abortion ballot measure set to be voted on in this November's election. Now, should it pass, the measure would bar the state from making new laws that ban abortion before a pregnancy is viable, which is usually around the 24-week mark or so. Arizona Right for Life is the group that sued to have it removed, claiming the measure's petition summary was misleading by not explaining that it would have invalidated the state's current 15-week abortion ban, among other existing abortion laws in the state. The court ultimately rejected this argument, however, saying that state law doesn't require such an explanation, and also said that most voters would likely understand the measure's effects anyway. A spokesperson for Arizona Right to Life said this, quote, regardless of the ruling, we are still looking forward to working with our pro-life partners across the state to continue to inform voters about this ambiguous language. This comes as Arizona's Secretary of State had certified the measure earlier this month, making Arizona one of 8 states with abortion on the ballot this election cycle. And that's something that we certainly need to be praying about as Christians, because we've seen plenty of times this going the other way, where more and more states are opting to enshrine abortion into their state laws.
Yeah, and Arizona is a battleground state, so it's even more important.
Really can go either way.
Yeah. All right, well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
And for more updates until our next show, you can follow us on social media. Type in FISM News on all your favorite platforms, or you can also download the FISM app. Thanks so much, God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow with more news coverage.